Today was round 11 of the candidates tournament in Moscow, and there were some pretty dramatic events. It's quite clear that tiredness and nerves are now playing a big role in the games. First of all, let's take a look at the game between Vasilij Topalov and Fabiano Caruana. Big chance for Caruana. He was leading in the tournament at the start of the round, and he's playing Topalov, who is at the foot of the table. So first against last. And things went very well for Caruana, very sharp opening, and the game turned in his favour. He's playing with black, and he's the exchange up. So rook for a bishop ahead. He played bishop g5. Good move. Threatening to take. Of course, that pawn is pinned. So Topalov played bishop f4. I should say they're now approaching, or now Caruana is in big time pressure. He was basically down to his increment, just playing with 30 seconds on the clock. Here, if he'd had more time, he would have, of course, exchanged pieces. That's what you want to do when you're material ahead. He said after the game he got spooked. He was worried about White's potential counterplay with these pawns on the queen side, but actually that king can head across, cover those pawns, and then it should be a pretty easy win with the two rooks. But instead he retreated the bishop, and things obviously, he got a little bit unsure at this point. e4 is a tricky move, opens up this diagonal, so that in this position, of course, Caruana would very much like to take this pawn, but then the rook hangs here. So rook e1 played by Caruana, then rook c2, another very tricky move by Topalov. So in some cases he can actually take that bishop, and then the pawn goes through. So Caruana played g5, that got taken, and now they've reached time control, and Caruana played rook d5. Position still looks very tricky, but to everyone's surprise, Caruana offered a draw here, which Topalov accepted. Now, perhaps objectively, this is drawn. It's certainly getting very tricky. After the game, for example, the players examined this end game, and this should probably end in a draw. So that's probably how the game would have run. But still, I think, simply offering this draw, that in itself is a sign that Caruana kind of, lost his nerve a little bit, actually. Normally one would play this position out. So, well, let's move on. So that game ended in a draw. Aronian against Svidler. Of course, Aronian in second position, but had a great attack against Svidler, but somehow the game, turned in Svidler's favour, and, well, Svidler with the black pieces. Svidler has 4 pawns in front of his king, so Svidler's king now absolutely secure. Only 2 pawns covering Aronian's king, and that is significant. And now the counter-attack came. Queen check. King had to step up the board, not good, and now rook here into the corner, and suddenly a deadly pin threatened, and there's no defence for White in this position. After queen b2 check, in fact, Aronian resigned. There's no defence with the queen and the rook just entering into the position. So, for example, after the queen blocks, black can take another pawn, and then another pawn, 3 pawns up. Still an attack against White's king, completely hopeless. So Aronian resigned. Shocking stuff. Had such a good position. And what about Giri against Nakamura? Well, Giri up to this point has made all draws in the tournament, but if he won today, he could still be in with a chance in the tournament. He completely outplayed Nakamura, and here he was looking for the kill. He took on g7 with the knight. He thought this was a winning move, but Nakamura took the piece, and then rook g3. Giri just thought this was winning. He'd completely overlooked that rook g5 saves the day for black. Because after pawn takes rook, then of course now it's possible to take the queen. There's no longer a pin. So Giri, I mean, poor guy, he had to take the rook and then take the pawn here, and he offered a draw. Well, the position is now level, because after knight e7, well, white takes the pawn here. Although Nakamura has an extra knight, well, there aren't enough pawns on the board to force a win. So draw, absolutely right result here. Poor Giri had a winning position. If we just go back to here, well, you know, he could play something simple. He could play rook e5 and then take this pawn. Should be a winning position for white, but knight g7 rushed it. So let's move on to Anand against Karyakin. Now, in this position, so Anand with the white pieces, this is just out of the opening, and it looks as though Karyakin has equalised completely. Opposite coloured bishops. Doesn't look like there's too much going on, but have a look what happened. Okay, g5, straightening out the pawns, looks fine for black. Rook d6. Okay, this is the first indication that actually matters aren't so simple. Well, that's a very nice outpost for the rook. Okay, the game went on like this, still nothing terribly outrageous happening. Of course, Anand has control over the d file, but, well, black has d7 under control. But little by little, Anand starts to make progress. So he's advancing pawns on the queen side. Still doesn't look like anything too much going on. Maybe Karyakin should kind of compromise a little and just put the bishop here. And it doesn't matter too much about this pawn. So here, well, even here, in this position, the bishop's in a reasonable spot. But, well, white is still has some play on the queen side. Anyway, Karyakin put the bishop to h7, maybe not the best square. And now Anand does start to make progress. Still looks like this is equal. But Anand found a very clever idea. Well, exchanging rooks gets you absolutely nowhere in this position. So here the black rook just blocks out the white one. But here Anand found b6. Well, Karyakin closed the position, of course, and now here's the point. That pawn on b6 gives the rook some support. Of course, exchanging would give white a very nice pass pawn on c7. But I mean, this is just extraordinary how things turn out. So king f8 from Karyakin, and now c4, so that prevents the bishop coming to d5. Now Karyakin's in time pressure and things start to get a bit critical. Okay, so he's given up a pawn. The point was to bring this bishop back into play. And now f4 from Anand. Now this is a very unpleasant move to have to face in time pressure. You know, how do you react to this? Do you exchange and allow white's bishop into the game and support this rook? Well, that doesn't look very nice. Maybe the bishop comes here. Who knows? Karyakin decides to exchange the rook off. It turns out f5 would have been a better move. But of course, to play this when you're short of time, it's a very complicated move. Looks like it does probably reach a draw. So after this, then you take, and then you have to take on c7. It's still tricky, because the trick is that after check, the king actually steps up and threatens the rook, and that saves black. But yeah, difficult to calculate in time pressure. In fact, you know, Anand should probably play like this, but this endgame is a draw now after the exchange, and then bishop f5 should be a draw. Anyway, f5 probably the best move. Instead, Karyakin exchanged rooks and played rook here. Now things have gone pretty bad. Anand played an excellent move, f5 and then h4, and he's got what he wants. So for example, after black takes this pawn, then, well, rook d4 is a good move, and this is extremely uncomfortable. White is going to take this pawn. You could also take that pawn straight away, and that's a serious advantage for white. The game wasn't much better. g6 played. Rook d4, very nice move, and in this position black is in massive trouble. After this, black does not have time to take this pawn off because the bishop drops back, hits the rook, and then you take the bishop. So Karyakin had to put the bishop on this absolutely miserable square, and after f6, that is a really unpleasant position for black to have to defend. Of course, this pawn can be taken care of. There is a solid blockade here. The problem is that white can combine threats to bring the king into the position with an attack on the b7 pawn. So basically that's two weaknesses, and Karyakin can't hold this position. It's gone. I'm going to leap ahead 20 moves to this position, and, well, Anand already captured this pawn on b7, and that means that these pawns are now vulnerable, and this is a winning position. Let's see how Anand finished the game off. So first of all, a check, and rook a8 to hassle the a pawn. So still combining threats on the queen side and the king side. King across. Now, not so good to take the pawn, because after this move suddenly the rook is restricted. Can't really get out. But you don't need to take straight away. King f4 is an excellent move, with the idea bishop h4, and that bishop bounces round off the back cushion and comes to take the pawn on a5. King here. So black still inviting white to take here, but now the rook just heads out again. And you see, this is very clever. So having switched one way, Anand switches back, and now the king is totally offside, and it's going to make white's advance on the king side much more effective with the king completely out of play. So the game went like this: bishop f7. First of all, a careful move. Maybe black can sometimes play this. So rook e4 just covers that and covers the a pawn. There's no rush. And now the king comes in. So this is very nasty. King here. Well, if the king had come back the other way, then bishop e1. This is still a huge problem for black. So the king went to a6, and now rook e7, and Karyakin resigned, because after the exchange, well, let's just go to the very end. Now white's king enters, threatens to take the bishop, king up protects it, and after bishop g5, that position is Zugzwang. The king has to move, and then white takes the bishop. Beautiful, beautiful endgame performance from Anand. So, after 11 rounds, it is so close. Caruana and Anand share the lead with 6.5 points. Then Karyakin on 6, Aronian, Giri and Svidler all on 5.5. And any one of those 6 players can still win, because there are still 3 rounds remaining. It couldn't be closer.